I'd always thought of myself as an easygoing guy. In my line of work, land development, patience, tact, and diplomacy were vital skills. Negotiating with city planners, construction teams, and investors had taught me to navigate rough waters with a cool head. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the hurricane called the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association. 2 months earlier, I relocated to Evergreen Meadows, a charming suburban community nestled on the outskirts of the city. Lined with well-kept lawns, picturesque streets shaded by mature oak trees, and neatly arranged rows of identical white mailboxes. It was the kind of neighborhood you'd see in brochures promising a better, peaceful life. Initially, it felt as though I'd stepped into a dream. On moving day, neighbors I hadn't even met yet waved warmly, some even stopping by to introduce themselves and offer trays of homemade cookies. Everyone seemed genuine, welcoming, and eager to share tips about the best local coffee shops or weekend farmers markets. The neighborhood's visual harmony was clearly maintained by the Homeowners Association, which, according to most neighbors, kept Evergreen Meadows pristine and pleasant. At first glance, the HOA appeared efficient and beneficial, their meticulously drafted welcome packet containing helpful details about trash schedules, lawn care recommendations, and even friendly reminders to ensure our pets didn't roam freely into neighbors' yards. But tucked within the friendly guidelines was something less comforting. A line in the handbook, phrased in an oddly stern tone, warning homeowners against unauthorized alterations to community aesthetics. It seemed trivial at first, easily dismissible among the overwhelming positives. My first official encounter with the HOA was at their monthly meeting, held at the neighborhood clubhouse. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as residents sipped coffee and chatted amicably about recent community improvements. The meeting began promptly at 7, led by a woman whose presence filled the room instantly. Her hair was impeccably styled, her sharp gaze framed by oversized designer glasses, and her voice, though soft, carried unquestionable authority. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her smile carefully controlled. "I'm Linda Foster, your HOA president. Let's start tonight by welcoming new residents into our lovely community." The applause around me felt genuine, and I found myself smiling, too, grateful for the inclusive atmosphere. Linda continued the meeting with practiced efficiency, outlining upcoming events and praising homeowners who had recently enhanced their property landscaping. On the surface, everything was ideal. Yet something in Linda's carefully manicured expression struck me as subtly off, as though beneath the gracious exterior lay something far less pleasant. It was a faint impression, fleeting enough to dismiss easily, yet stubborn enough to linger in my mind. "One final reminder," Linda concluded smoothly, eyes scanning the room carefully. "Remember to review our community guidelines. It's our shared responsibility to ensure Evergreen Meadows remains perfect. Deviations from our established rules will unfortunately necessitate corrective measures." Corrective measures. Her choice of words sparked a murmur through the room. I glanced around. Others seemed unfazed or perhaps accustomed to Linda's phrasing. The subtle chill down my spine was dismissed as paranoia born from years of dealing with tough bureaucrats in my profession. That evening, I walked home beneath a canopy of stars, trying to convince myself the eerie feeling I'd experienced was merely my imagination playing tricks. After all, I'd navigated countless city zoning commissions, difficult property disputes, and tense board meetings. A suburban HOA couldn't possibly cause me trouble. As days went by, I settled into Evergreen Meadows comfortably. I planted flowers along my front path, mowed my lawn regularly, and enjoyed quiet evenings on my porch, waving occasionally at passing neighbors. Life seemed to flow easily here, a pleasant escape from my usual stress-filled job. Yet occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of Linda strolling past my house, clipboard in hand, meticulously noting something unseen, her gaze sharp, calculating. One bright Sunday morning, while sipping coffee and planning out a new backyard fence, purely intended for privacy and aesthetics, I spotted Linda standing quietly across the street, clearly studying my property. Our eyes met briefly, her expression shifted subtly, a fleeting tightness at the corners of her mouth. She nodded curtly and continued walking, her pace deliberate and purposeful. Though minor, that brief interaction gnawed at my curiosity, lingering like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. Still, I brushed it aside, reassuring myself that life in evergreen meadows was nothing short of perfect. Little did I know, as I sketched fence designs later that day, humming contentedly under the warmth of the afternoon sun, that Linda Foster had already marked me down in her clipboard, her smile fading into something darker. And so began my peaceful suburban dream's slow spiral toward chaos. A journey that would turn my quiet life upside down, reveal hidden truths, and, ultimately, unleash consequences no one in evergreen meadows ever anticipated. The sun rose lazily over our quiet suburban neighborhood, spilling soft morning hues across perfectly manicured lawns. I'd chosen this community precisely because of its tranquility, a slice of peace away from my hectic career as a land developer. Yet, little did I suspect how swiftly that serenity would unravel. My backyard, although generously sized, had always felt a bit too open. Joggers waved politely, neighbors' curious glances lingered, and casual dog walkers could inadvertently observe my weekend relaxation sessions. Privacy became less a preference and more an essential element for comfort. After weeks of contemplation, I resolved to erect a fence. It wasn't intended as an act of defiance or isolation. It simply offered the solitude I craved. To maintain community aesthetics, I meticulously reviewed the Homeowners Association HOA handbook. Each regulation, carefully documented, allowed fences within defined heights and colors. Relieved, I selected an elegant design. A cedarwood fence, just under the 6-foot limit, painted in tasteful neutral tones. Construction began on a crisp Monday morning. My contractor, Mike, and his team arrived promptly, their trucks neatly lined along my driveway, tools organized and ready. Mike was renowned locally for exceptional craftsmanship, his projects consistently praised. "Morning," Mike greeted, a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Ready to get started?" "Absolutely," I replied enthusiastically, shaking his hand. "Just hoping it won't disturb the neighbors too much." Mike chuckled reassuringly. "It'll be smooth and quick. We'll wrap this up before anyone notices." The gentle hum of drills and saws soon filled the air, the rhythmic sounds signaling progress. Curious neighbors stopped to admire the ongoing work. Mr. Jenkins from across the street, his gardening gloves stained with fresh earth, offered a thumbs up. "Looks sharp. Been thinking of doing something similar myself," he commented approvingly. "Glad you like it," I replied, comforted by the camaraderie. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, approached slowly, her tiny dog tugging impatiently at its leash. "Marvelous addition," she said sweetly, eyes twinkling. "Now you can finally sunbathe in peace, young man." We laughed gently together. The warmth of neighborhood acceptance filled me with satisfaction. 2 days passed swiftly, the fence rising beautifully, each plank carefully aligned, each nail meticulously placed. Mike and his team displayed unmatched diligence, and as they wrapped up the final touches, pride swelled within me. The fence was precisely as envisioned, classy, unobtrusive, and entirely within HOA guidelines. Or so I thought. The tranquility shattered abruptly with a curt knock at my front door. Through the peephole, Karen Abbott, the HOA secretary, stood rigidly, clipboard clenched tightly, her lips pursed tightly enough to pale them. Taking a calming breath, I opened the door with deliberate politeness. "Good afternoon, Karen," I offered politely. She didn't return the greeting, thrusting a neatly printed form toward me. "This is your official notice. Your fence violates HOA regulations. You have 10 days to rectify or remove it completely." I blinked, confusion etched deeply onto my features. "I'm sorry, but I'm quite certain my fence meets every outline standard in the HOA guidelines." Her eyes narrowed, voice sharp, unwaveringly dismissive. "Unfortunately, aesthetics are subjective, and the board finds your design inappropriate. The color scheme is disruptive." "Disruptive?" I repeated incredulously. "Karen, it's neutral cedar." Multiple neighbors complimented its appearance. "Neighbor opinions aren't binding, are they?" she sneered dismissively, lifting an eyebrow. We prioritize community coherence. My jaw tightened slightly. I specifically referenced HOA guidelines. Perhaps we should clarify this misunderstanding calmly at the next meeting. Karen's eyes flashed with impatience, voice dripping with icy disdain. That meeting is next month. You'll be fined each day the fence remains standing. Compliance isn't optional. Frustration bubbled internally, yet I maintained composure. I'm attempting cooperation here, Karen. Threatening fines seems unnecessarily aggressive. Her posture stiffened further, clipboard rising defensively. Aggressive? Perhaps if you'd bothered to consult the HOA directly, we wouldn't be in this predicament. I meticulously checked the manual provided to every homeowner. I insisted firmly, struggling to hide exasperation. Everything aligns. She cut sharply through my reasoning. Manuals can be outdated. You need explicit approval from the HOA board. Approval you clearly didn't seek. How could anyone reasonably comply when those guidelines apparently mean nothing? I asked evenly, trying hard to suppress rising anger. Reasonable or not, rules exist, Karen snapped coldly. Ignoring them has consequences. I exhaled deeply, sensing the futility of this argument. Very well, I'll attend the meeting, present my case, and resolve this. If you insist, she replied dismissively, her voice brimming with arrogant confidence, already stepping away. But be warned, the fines add up quickly. She pivoted sharply, heels clicking authoritatively down my walkway, leaving a trail of bitterness behind. I stood silently, stunned by this rapid escalation, the unexpected antagonism leaving me momentarily speechless. Slowly, irritation shifted into determination. Karen's blatant arrogance sparked a quiet resolve within me. I wasn't accustomed to losing battles, especially unreasonable ones. The following morning, a formal letter from the HOA arrived, an imposing envelope filled with bureaucratic coldness. The hefty fine, prominently printed, practically mocked me. It became instantly clear the HOA had weaponized ambiguity against homeowners, and Karen reveled in wielding it. Neighbors noticed something amiss, their friendly smiles shifting into concerned glances as they spotted the increasingly tense exchanges between Karen and myself. Mr. Jenkins cautiously approached later that afternoon. Everything all right? I saw Karen yesterday. Seemed pretty heated. HOA issues, I replied honestly, maintaining calmness. She thinks the fence violates community guidelines. Jenkins scratched his chin thoughtfully. Typical Karen, never lets anyone rest easy. Let me know if I can help. His quiet offer strengthened my resolve. Clearly, Karen's relentless policing had exhausted everyone's patience. Determined to resolve the matter decisively, I meticulously prepared my evidence for the next HOA meeting. Photographs, manual excerpts, and supportive neighbor testimonials neatly compiled, ready to challenge Karen's subjective aesthetic judgment. Yet as days passed, tensions only intensified. Karen seized every opportunity to harass, glaring judgmentally whenever we crossed paths. Her frequent drive-bys became intimidating, purposeful reminders of her power. Despite irritation, I resolved to remain patient, convinced logic would triumph at the upcoming meeting. Unfortunately, logic rarely guides conflicts fueled by pettiness and power. Unbeknownst to Karen, however, my patience concealed a quiet confidence, rooted firmly in my professional experience. She mistakenly viewed me merely as another compliant resident she could manipulate. Karen had no inkling of my true capabilities or resources. She'd soon learn her mistake, but not before causing unnecessary damage. Her arrogance blinded her, preventing recognition of the irony awaiting her. While she relished temporary dominance, plotting my fence's demise, I silently planned a far greater surprise. The neighborhood drama had only begun. The HOA meeting room was dimly lit, the atmosphere thick with artificial politeness. I sat across from Karen and 4 other board members. Their expressions ranged from indifferent to subtly hostile. Clearing my throat, I began calmly, determined to keep emotions in check. Look, I understand there are rules, but my fence meets every practical guideline. It matches the aesthetic standards and doesn't obstruct anyone's view. I'm asking for reconsideration. Karen, sitting erect like royalty presiding over her court, tapped a manicured fingernail impatiently on her clipboard. Rules are rules, she replied curtly, her eyes narrowing slightly. You had plenty of opportunity to discuss this beforehand. I followed procedure, I explained, trying to mask my rising irritation. I filed paperwork, received verbal approval from the committee chair. Yet suddenly there's an issue. What changed? The members exchanged glances, silently deferring to Karen, who leaned forward and feigned a polite smile. Committee chairs don't speak for the entire board, she said with cold authority. You'll need to remove the fence immediately or face additional penalties. Frustration bubbled beneath my skin. Keeping composure, I tried again. Removing it entirely seems excessive. Isn't there a compromise? A modification? Karen's lip twitched, betraying a hint of satisfaction. Our decision is final. I left feeling defeated but unwilling to surrender entirely. Over the following days, I made minor adjustments to the fence, hoping it would placate the board. But each morning, like clockwork, fresh fines awaited me, always citing vague violations of community harmony. Soon, tension spilled beyond my mailbox into everyday life. Surveillance became apparent. HOA members strolling deliberately past my home, snapping pictures, noting every trivial detail. I saw Karen herself lingering by my driveway, smartphone in hand, meticulously documenting imagined offenses. Neighbors I'd previously considered friendly now avoided my gaze, undoubtedly swayed by Karen's whisper campaign. The community's warm familiarity turned bitter overnight. I felt isolated, targeted. Then came the exaggerated complaints, absurd grievances over harmless issues. One evening, after mowing the lawn slightly past the arbitrary quiet hours, flashing lights pierced the night's calm. I opened my front door to two bewildered police officers, Karen standing smugly on the sidewalk behind them. We received reports of excessive noise and disturbance, one officer stated, clearly uncomfortable with the ridiculousness of the complaint. I was just finishing up yard work, I responded evenly, trying to hide embarrassment and anger. Karen's shrill voice cut in sharply. He does this deliberately to disrupt the peace. He has no respect for our community standards. The officers exchanged weary glances. After a brief inspection, they apologized for the inconvenience and departed, leaving Karen visibly irritated at the anticlimactic conclusion. As weeks dragged on, the HOA's harassment intensified. More unwarranted fines accumulated. Constant surveillance felt intrusive, oppressive. The deliberate intimidation was designed to force submission, yet it only strengthened my resolve. Determined, I began discreetly digging deeper into HOA records, quietly gathering documents from overlooked meetings and obscure financial reports. It didn't take long to spot inconsistencies. Hidden expenditures, vague justifications, and favoritism glaringly apparent upon closer scrutiny. I sensed a deeper, sinister dynamic behind Karen's aggression. Perhaps personal grievances, perhaps something larger. The initial fence dispute was merely a trigger, an excuse used to exercise unchecked authority. This realization sharpened my focus. If negotiation was impossible, perhaps exposure would be my ultimate leverage. Karen had underestimated not just my stubbornness, but my ability to uncover hidden truths. Each quiet evening, fueled by determination, I sifted through pages of dull HOA records, capturing screenshots, printing emails, and taking meticulous notes. My battle was no longer merely personal. It was about justice, fairness, and a community held captive by a petty tyrant. Finally, with evidence firmly in hand, confidence swelled within me. Karen had chosen the wrong fence to fight over, completely oblivious to the storm quietly brewing around her. Soon, she'd face consequences far beyond her worst imagination. Nightfall enveloped the neighborhood, cloaking the neatly lined houses in shadows punctuated by the soft glow of porch lights. Sitting in my dimly lit home office, I studied the pile of letters, each stamped with the dreaded HOA official notice. Karen's venomous tone echoed in my mind, sharpening my resolve. The unfairness burned fiercely, urging me forward. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. This was personal. Earlier conversations with neighbors hinted at irregularities, whispers of favoritism swirling beneath polished HOA meetings. But whispers alone wouldn't topple Karen or expose her tight-knit circle. Concrete evidence was my goal. I began meticulously combing through the HOA bylaws, highlighting each section Karen conveniently overlooked when enforcing rules against certain residents. A pattern slowly surfaced: arbitrary enforcement targeting newcomers or dissenters, while Karen's close friends sailed through unquestioned. Discrimination was subtle yet unmistakable. My heart pounded each night I crept through the darkened streets, casually walking my dog while subtly recording unusual activities. My phone camera, hidden behind a relaxed grip, captured moments of preferential treatment. A board member constructing a gazebo without approval, another installing a gaudy lawn sculpture untouched by fines. But nothing was definitive yet. I needed proof of deeper misconduct. Rumors hinted at financial mismanagement, and to confirm this, I'd have to get closer to the source. One evening, feigning innocence, I attended the monthly HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. Karen presided like a queen, her every word dripping with authority and thinly veiled disdain. Beneath her fake smiles, contempt brewed. Afterward, feigning friendly curiosity, I lingered, strategically positioning myself near the exit. As Karen exited, engrossed in conversation with her treasurer ally, Mark, their lowered voices reached me briefly. That payment cleared quicker than usual. Nobody noticed. Karen's sharp whisper sent chills down my spine. Mark hesitated, scanning the hallway nervously. Relax. It's buried deep enough. Even auditors wouldn't look there. Karen nodded, satisfied. Good. My pulse quickened. Confirmation. Now I needed tangible proof. Days passed as I mapped out my next move. The HOA financial records were supposed to be transparent, but repeated requests met delays and vague excuses. Karen's stonewalling was suspicious. She must have suspected scrutiny but underestimated my determination. I leveraged my professional network discreetly, uncovering an online portal managed loosely by the HOA's accounting firm. With calculated patience, I sifted through archived reports and discovered puzzling maintenance expenses repeatedly paid to an obscure company, Evergreen Landscaping Services. A quick search revealed Evergreen belonged to Karen's brother-in-law. Curiously, the landscape around Karen's and her allies' homes seemed excessively lavish compared to everyone else's sparse lawns. One midnight, compelled by mounting suspicion, I installed discreet security cameras around my property, carefully angling some towards the main HOA office. Surveillance felt justified yet thrillingly clandestine. Days blurred, reviewing hours of footage yielded little initially, until one rainy evening brought luck. Under the steady drizzle, Mark hurried towards the HOA building, nervously glancing around before slipping inside, holding a large folder tightly. Minutes later, Karen arrived, joining him in hushed secrecy. They emerged shortly afterward, folder noticeably thinner. I reviewed the timestamp, comparing it to financial audits, exactly when unexplained expenses were officially logged. The evidence accumulated, but anxiety gnawed at my sleep. Discovery seemed inevitable. Paranoia took root every time I saw Karen's cold, probing eyes watching me. In a last bold move, disguising myself in maintenance attire, clipboard in hand, I accessed the HOA storage unit using a borrowed key from a sympathetic neighbor previously targeted by Karen's tyranny. Sweat trickled down my back, adrenaline fueling me. Stacked boxes labeled old records concealed the truth I sought. Fingers trembling, I flipped rapidly through receipts, contracts, and memos. Buried beneath trivial paperwork were damning documents. Unauthorized reimbursements to Karen for non-existent events, inflated invoices funneling HOA funds directly into friends' businesses, and deliberately overlooked infractions from her allies. Suddenly, voices outside startled me. Karen's unmistakable sharp tone berating Mark. Panic surged as their footsteps approached. My breath froze, heart hammering violently. "I swear I locked it," Mark stammered. "Incompetent," Karen hissed. The door rattled slightly, sending chills down my spine. I hid deeper behind shelves, scarcely breathing. A tense silence hung heavy until their retreating footsteps brought relief. As the storage door slammed shut, I exhaled shakily, clutching incriminating files tightly. Escaping unseen, relief mixed triumphantly with dread. My hands now possessed power, potent enough to shatter Karen's oppressive regime. Justice loomed near, tangible yet terrifying in its magnitude. Returning home undetected, I secured the evidence meticulously. Soon, Karen's carefully constructed empire would unravel spectacularly, and her reign of pettiness and corruption would face swift, merciless reckoning. After months of enduring constant humiliation from the Homeowners Association, it was time to shift gears. I knew patience would pay off. The day Karen smugly issued another fine for my fence, something clicked. I didn't argue, didn't protest. I simply smiled, quietly folding the notice into my pocket. Little did she know, that slip of paper was the catalyst she'd regret handing over. It started subtly. Using my connections as a land developer, I discreetly initiated conversations with homeowners around Karen's pristine residence. Nobody suspected a thing. After all, my profession had never come up in community chats. To them, I was merely a neighbor who preferred privacy. Karen, too wrapped up in her HOA queen persona, was clueless about my actual background. Her ignorance played directly into my strategy. First, I approached Mr. Matthews, an elderly man eager to move closer to his grandchildren. He jumped at my generous yet discreet offer, relieved to skip the tedious realtor process. Next was Samantha Cruz, a young entrepreneur struggling to manage mortgage payments amid business pressures. My timely proposal alleviated her worries, and the deal closed swiftly and quietly. Within weeks, I'd quietly secured several properties surrounding Karen's immaculate home. Karen's obliviousness became almost amusing. Occasionally, we crossed paths during community gatherings, where she continued flaunting her power. Each arrogant glance she threw my way only fueled my determination. Her facade of authority was paper-thin. Soon enough, she'd see exactly how fragile her throne was. With properties acquired, it was time for meticulous planning. I envisioned transformations that were entirely legal yet creatively unsettling for someone like Karen. Initial ideas were subtle but impactful, developing these adjacent properties into community facilities, perhaps a bustling children's playground behind her once serene backyard, or a vibrant public dog park beside her pristine garden. As blueprints filled my home office, satisfaction swelled within me. The irony was perfect. Karen, who worshipped control and tranquility, would soon find herself enveloped by thriving, joyous chaos. Every squeal of laughter from the playground, every cheerful bark from happy pets would grate on her nerves, a constant reminder of her dwindling influence. My next step was engaging trusted contractors discreetly. No signs or announcements yet. Secrecy was crucial. Crews quietly visited under the guise of routine inspections. Observing Karen peer suspiciously through her curtains, I couldn't help but smile. Her suspicion was gratifying, yet she remained helplessly unaware of my grand design. During HOA meetings, whispers of mysterious developments surfaced. Karen's discomfort was palpable. Her voice trembled slightly during heated discussions about potential threats to neighborhood serenity. Her paranoia escalated beautifully, exactly as planned. When questioned directly, I maintained calm ignorance, feigning innocent curiosity. Watching her frustration simmer was poetic justice. Simultaneously, rumors emerged about the HOA's financial misconduct, another seed I'd carefully planted by anonymously sharing evidence collected earlier. Neighbors grew restless, questioning Karen's integrity openly. Her authority began fracturing slowly, deliciously, with each disgruntled resident confronting her hypocrisy. Throughout it all, Karen never connected me to her troubles. Her arrogance blinded her completely, dismissing the thought that the quiet neighbor she'd bullied for months could mastermind her downfall. Each subtle movement I orchestrated tightened the invisible noose around her fabricated reputation. One morning, while reviewing finalized plans for the community recreational area, satisfaction surged. The city swiftly approved the development permits, endorsing my vision enthusiastically due to obvious community benefits. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetic, transforming Karen's worst nightmare into the neighborhood's greatest asset. Quietly, construction fences rose overnight, marking clear boundaries around Karen's property lines. Her morning shriek echoed through the neighborhood, more satisfying than I'd imagined. From my porch, coffee in hand, I watched her frantic confrontation with indifferent contractors. The sight was immensely gratifying, karma perfectly delivered. Ironically, Karen rushed to the HOA for help, but residents, now skeptical and suspicious, withheld support. Her panic multiplied when city officials politely reminded her of approved zoning changes and community endorsements. The once mighty Karen now stood powerless, dwarfed by forces beyond her control. As the first construction machinery arrived, I calmly walked past her frantic protests. Our eyes met briefly. She finally saw beyond her ignorance, recognition dawning sharply. Her expression, a mixture of shock, fury, and helpless defeat, was unforgettable. "You did this?" she sputtered weakly. I smiled politely, my voice steady. "Just improving the neighborhood, Karen. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Her silence spoke volumes. The irony hung heavily between us. Every fine, every complaint, every humiliation she'd inflicted had returned to dismantle her carefully constructed empire. In the following days, as vibrant community life took shape around Karen's shrinking sanctuary, I savored every moment. Her power eroded entirely, replaced by undeniable proof that true strength resided in quiet patience and strategic resolve. Karma had never tasted sweeter. The community hall buzzed with anticipation. The usually mundane monthly HOA meeting was packed tonight, neighbors spilling into the hallways, curiosity drawing even the most indifferent residents. An uneasy tension hung thick in the air, whispers swirling amidst the crowded seats. At the front, Karen sat proudly, unaware this evening would shatter her carefully constructed empire. Her manicured fingers tapped impatiently on the polished wood of the boardroom table. Her confidence radiated arrogance, oblivious to the approaching storm. In the back, I waited calmly, folders tucked neatly beneath my arm. Weeks of meticulous planning and evidence gathering culminated in this very moment. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, my voice calm but assertive. "Excuse me before the meeting proceeds." I spoke clearly, eyes fixed directly on Karen, whose brows furrowed suspiciously. "There are certain irregularities I believe our community needs to address immediately." Karen's expression twisted, annoyed yet curious. "And what exactly are these irregularities you're babbling about?" she snapped. "I'm glad you asked," I replied, deliberately measured, approaching the podium and placing my folders carefully down. I flipped open the first document, projecting the evidence clearly for everyone to see. "Let's begin with financial mismanagement." Gasps murmured through the crowd. Karen visibly stiffened, her face losing color as scanned receipts and bank statements illuminated the wall behind me. Numbers didn't lie, and each digit stripped away her facade. It seems Karen, alongside certain HOA board members, utilized our community funds for personal luxuries. I continued, maintaining eye contact. Vacation expenses, spa treatments, extravagant dinners, each funded by your monthly dues. An eruption of shocked whispers echoed through the hall. Neighbors turned to one another, disbelief apparent in their eyes. Karen, visibly shaken, tried to interject. "This is completely false. These accusations are documented." I calmly cut her off. "Every dollar accounted for." Karen shot up from her seat, her voice trembling with indignation. "You can't just make accusations without proof." "Proof," I repeated deliberately, calmly flipping to the next set of documents. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain why these renovation permits were approved selectively, exclusively benefiting your close associates, while others faced unnecessary fines and harassment for trivial matters, like fences." The audience's murmurs grew louder. Neighbors previously indifferent now glared openly at Karen, anger and betrayal evident. Karen sputtered helplessly, her composure unraveling. That was justified under our rules. Rules enforced arbitrarily, I countered sharply, voice rising slightly to emphasize the point. Favoritism isn't governance, Karen. It's corruption. The hall erupted with louder accusations and angry questions, people demanding immediate explanations. Karen, desperate to regain control, slammed her hand on the table. Enough! I am still the president, and this meeting will proceed according to my agenda. Not anymore, came a strong voice from the side. Neighbors turned to see Mrs. Gonzalez, one of the longest-standing residents, rising from her chair. You've lied to us, manipulated us, Karen. We trusted you, and you've betrayed this entire community. That's nonsense, Karen screamed, panic evident. This is a conspiracy. Conspiracy? Another voice shouted from the crowd. The evidence is clear. How long did you think you could fool us? Karen stumbled backward slightly, eyes darting frantically as she tried one final move. I demand order. I'll call the authorities and have you all charged with harassment. No need, I calmly stated, pulling out my phone. They're already here. On cue, the hall doors swung open, revealing two uniformed officers stepping forward purposefully. Karen's eyes widened, her defiance giving way to genuine fear. Officers, I said respectfully, handing over copies of my evidence. These documents clearly outline the HOA's fraudulent activities. The officers briefly reviewed the pages, exchanged a glance, then stepped toward Karen. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. This is outrageous, Karen shrieked, attempting to back away. You can't do this. I did nothing wrong. The evidence says otherwise, the officer stated firmly, gently but firmly escorting her from the podium. Karen's desperate pleas fell on deaf ears as neighbors watched silently, witnessing justice finally served. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars painted a dramatic end to Karen's reign. Residents stood in silence, some recording on their phones, others simply absorbing the long-overdue karma. Turning toward the crowd, I spoke gently, breaking the tense silence. Tonight wasn't just about exposing corruption. It's about reclaiming the trust and integrity our community deserves. Let this be the start of something better. The hall slowly filled with relieved applause, neighbors embracing, tensions easing. The chapter of deceit and control had ended decisively, clearing the way for a brighter, fairer future. As I gathered my files, I allowed myself a brief smile, satisfaction not just from exposing Karen, but knowing I'd restored justice where it had long been absent. Sunlight trickled gently through the community center windows, illuminating an anxious crowd awaiting the latest neighborhood update. Whispers hummed softly through the room as residents exchanged speculative glances, anticipation heavy in their eyes. At the front stood Karen, her usually confident demeanor now frayed by weeks of scrutiny and humiliation. Beside her, the protagonist, calm, collected, and silently empowered by the knowledge of a masterstroke yet unrevealed. Finally, clearing his throat, he stepped forward and motioned for quiet. All attention locked onto him. Friends, neighbors, thank you for gathering here today, he began, voice steady yet carrying the gravity of revelation. We've endured unnecessary battles, unjust fines, and favoritism that tarnished our peace. But today this ends. Eyes widened with intrigue. Even Karen's tense posture betrayed curiosity, shadowed by suspicion. As many of you recently learned, I'm not merely a homeowner affected by these unfair decisions. I'm also a developer, one who has silently invested resources to rejuvenate our neighborhood, enhancing property values and community well-being. Gasps rippled across the audience, faces brightening with excitement, while Karen stiffened, realization dawning painfully slow. Behind the scenes, he continued calmly, savoring each deliberate word. I've secured permits, purchased vacant properties, and set in motion a project designed to transform our neglected spaces into vibrant communal parks, modern amenities, and safer walkways. A complete renewal. Cheers erupted spontaneously, drowning out Karen's initial attempts to object. Her voice faltered as applause filled the room, neighbors turning to each other in excitement. But the protagonist interjected, raising a reassuring hand. This grand vision also necessitates strategic use of surrounding land, including parcels adjacent to Mrs. Karen Sullivan's property. All heads turned sharply toward Karen. Her once proud figure now appeared diminished, shoulders shrinking beneath the weight of irony. Karen, he addressed her directly, tone tempered with professional courtesy masking subtle triumph. I recognize the sentimental value of your home. Considering recent revelations regarding your handling of community funds and abuses of HOA authority. However, your property's current market appeal has understandably suffered. Her eyes flared defiantly, yet defeat painted her features unmistakably. Therefore, he announced diplomatically yet decisively, I'm prepared to offer you a fair buyout. While admittedly below previous estimates, reflecting present circumstances, it's a reasonable exit given the reality you've created. Karen's mouth opened in stunned silence. The community, witnessing poetic justice firsthand, murmured approvingly. Her power, once formidable, was now transparently fragile. You can't, she stammered, voice faltering. This isn't over. It is, he countered calmly, authority clear in his words. Your decisions led to consequences. The community deserves better, and I promise to deliver exactly that. With a final sweep of the room, he added softly, yet confidently, let's rebuild trust, reclaim unity, and thrive together once more. The room burst into resounding applause. Residents embraced the protagonist's vision eagerly, choosing optimism over division. Karen stood isolated, utterly defeated by her own devices. In the aftermath, the HOA as it existed dissolved swiftly. Residents, guided by newfound transparency, established a fairer, cooperative structure free from manipulation. The neighborhood buzzed with energy, envisioning brighter days ahead. As Karen quietly exited the hall, her defeat echoed softly in the jubilant cheers behind her. An ironic end fitting the saga she'd unwittingly written herself. The neighborhood seemed reborn after the collapse of the old HOA. Streets that once echoed with petty disputes now buzzed with cheerful conversations and laughter. Gone were the tense gatherings and anxious whispers behind curtains. Instead, the community blossomed, connected by genuine friendships. As I walked down my driveway on a bright Saturday morning, neighbors waved warmly, some even stopping to chat, sharing weekend plans and playful banter. This newfound camaraderie replaced past anxieties, and even the houses appeared brighter, gardens blooming vibrantly, reflecting the lighter hearts within. My reputation, once tainted by baseless accusations, was now entirely restored. People no longer whispered suspiciously as I passed. Instead, they smiled with a blend of respect and appreciation. The quiet nods of gratitude reminded me that truth and patience had eventually prevailed. Karen, once the feared HOA figurehead, quietly moved away, her home now occupied by a young, enthusiastic family. Their children's laughter echoed through what used to be Karen's carefully manicured lawn, symbolizing a new era of freedom and joy. Her attempts at manipulation and control ironically led to her own downfall, leaving behind a poignant lesson for everyone in our community. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen's strict enforcement of trivial regulations had crumbled beneath the weight of her own misconduct. Her desperation for authority ultimately became the catalyst for positive change, proving that petty tyranny always collapses under genuine integrity. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood flourished like never before. Residents took pride in helping each other, organizing potluck dinners, community gardening projects, and local charity events. Trust replaced suspicion. Kindness overcame pettiness. My role in the neighborhood transformed significantly. From being a target of needless hostility, I had inadvertently become a trusted figure, sought after for advice and collaboration. It amused me how a simple dispute over a fence could lead to such meaningful change. Standing at the edge of my garden, looking at the children playing freely, elders chatting comfortably on their porches, and neighbors exchanging friendly gestures, I felt genuine pride. My efforts had not only secured my own peace but also the happiness of an entire community. In quiet reflection, it struck me clearly, genuine justice requires no revenge. Fairness naturally corrects injustice. The HOA's petty obsession with rules, ironically, had triggered its collapse, replaced by genuine community spirit and mutual respect. Life in our neighborhood had come full circle. Petty quarrels had given way to profound connections, suspicion replaced by unity. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues across peaceful rooftops, I smiled, knowing we'd all learned an invaluable lesson. Control driven by ego inevitably fails, but kindness and patience will always triumph.